a decision that changed the world, an attack on an independent state.
I have made the decision to conduct a special military operation.
An act of aggression, the largest since World War II, the most extensive combat operations in Europe in the last 80 years. Murders of civilians, deportations, and terror. Who and how will hold the mad dictator accountable?
The civilized world wants to put a definitive end to this issue.
In a special report, Crime and Punishment, Tribunal for Putin.
I have made the decision to conduct a special military operation.
Vladimir Putin unleashed a full-scale war against Ukraine on February 24, 2022, but it was already a continuation. The aggression against an independent state had been escalating since the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Donbas. According to international humanitarian law, the actions of Vladimir Putin and his army in Ukraine are regarded as an act of aggression, followed by horrific war crimes and crimes against humanity. While the Ukrainian army defends the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its state on the battlefield, Ukrainian diplomats and lawyers, alongside partners from all civilized countries, are gathering evidence to bring the Russian dictator and the military political elite who executed his orders to the dock.
Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka, Mariupol, Kherson, Izum. The list of cities where Russian soldiers have set foot and the atrocities committed there could go on for a long time. Murders, rapes, torture, filtration camps, abductions, deportations, and the taking of civilians hostage, scorched earth, and daily missile terror. All of this at the behest of Vladimir Putin. The entire civilized world acknowledges the Russian dictator must be convicted as a war criminal, along with his military commanders. The Russian elite has shielded itself from extradition to the International Criminal Court, the primary organ of criminal justice. The ICC holds individuals accountable for war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. For now, the Russian leadership is protected from justice by its non-participation in the Rome Statute, which has been ratified by 123 states.
The crime of aggression could theoretically be prosecuted using the mechanisms of the International Criminal Court, meaning it could conduct an investigation as such. However, for this to be possible, both Russia and Ukraine would need to be signatories to the Rome Statute, and Russia has not signed it. Therefore, this mechanism is not feasible.
The search for a mechanism to hold the dictator and his accomplices accountable for the crime of aggression, the root of the cascade of atrocities that followed, began immediately after the start of the full-scale invasion by Ukrainian authorities, law enforcement, diplomats, and lawyers. The most effective approach could be a tribunal established by the UN Security Council, following the precedent of the tribunal for Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic.
An international court is needed to address the crime of aggression, but such courts do not exist. They must be specially created. In the classic scenario, a UN Security Council resolution is required. Since Russia holds a veto, this mechanism is unavailable.
If we consider other options, such as through the General Assembly, there are still doubts at this stage of the UN body's development about whether the General Assembly's powers allow for the creation of such bodies and whether it can endow them with the same authority as the Security Council. Thus, this would not be a guaranteed method either.
The investigation of Russia's crime of aggression in February 2022 was first proposed by British international lawyer Philippe Sands, with support from former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown. To hold the leadership of the aggressor state accountable, they decided to establish a separate international tribunal.
The tribunal that has no analogs. In other words, there have never been tribunals for aggression with predominantly international components and some national elements. In essence, we are designing this tribunal not entirely from scratch, but in many ways, under unique circumstances.
Countries have agreed to create a statute for the new court in a way that as many countries as possible would adopt this decision. The court that we are primarily creating under the Council of Europe will also face the challenge of having its decisions recognized worldwide, especially in countries that maintain economic or political ties with Russia. This is why it is not simple. It's a new stage in international humanitarian law for the entire world.
In 2023, the European Parliament and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe supported the creation of an international tribunal through their resolutions. Eurojust began operating in The Hague, establishing the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression in Ukraine, where evidence is collected and stored. This is the initial step toward creating the Special Tribunal for Putin, as it is already unofficially called.
The crime of aggression is a very serious charge that requires a significant amount of time for judicial consideration. And the fact of creation of a separate tribunal for this issue demonstrates that, after all, democratic countries and the civilized world want to put a definitive end to this matter, as evil must be punished in any case.
At the end of March 2025, during a working meeting in Strasbourg, the Core Group, a coalition of over 40 partner countries of Ukraine, with the participation of the EU, Council of Europe, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and OSCE, prepared draft documents to launch the future International Special Tribunal. These include a bilateral agreement between Ukraine and the Council of Europe, the statute, and the management procedure for the Special Tribunal.
A treaty is signed with the Council of Europe. On the basis of this treaty, the court is established. Its recognition will depend on which countries actually acknowledge this tribunal through joining the treaty, and certain decisions that demonstrate mutual assistance, such as providing infrastructure for proceedings, investigations, or information exchange.
Now it really comes down to political will to sign this treaty. Then there will be an expanded treaty that any country in the world can join. At pace, we communicate with Morocco and Mexico and Japan and the Holy See and Israel. Within the tribunal, we also see Dutch leadership.
The main challenge for the future Special Tribunal today is overcoming the personal immunity of the President, Prime Minister, and head of the Foreign Ministry, which they hold while in office. The more countries support and recognize the tribunal, the more likely it is that the Russian elite's immunity will be lifted, lawyers say. Active work is underway on this. The war and crimes continue, and while they have no statute of limitations, time works against international investigations.
Putin is 70 years old, and the crime of aggression is, after all, a crime of top officials. Even Lavrov is of a considerable age. Waiting is not a great option for when this will happen, especially since none of them plan to leave power.
Within the framework of the Special Tribunal, at least 20 high-ranking Russian officials, as well as military commanders and propagandists, could face accountability. Regarding Putin, the tribunal's project envisions conducting an investigation and preparing an indictment.
Not only the executors will be tried there, but also those who gave the orders and initially created and shaped this policy, both Putin and Lavrov. The question is when and under what conditions. But I have no doubt that this will happen, that it's not only to convict these individuals, but also to create a sense of justice.
Arresting Putin while he remains in office is currently impossible. However, a tribunal for Russia's aggression against Ukraine could create an international precedent, where the leader of an occupying state cannot hide behind immunity and avoid accountability. Historically, trials of the military political leadership of aggressor states have mostly begun after the weakening or collapse of their regimes. The International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg took place after the surrender of the Third Reich.
Nuremberg is interesting to us also because it was a court created ad hoc without real prior experience. In essence, the Ukrainian tribunal is also an ad hoc tribunal, and it is a tribunal with no analogs.
Back then, in 1945 to 1946, a trial took place, as a result of which 24 high-ranking military officials of Nazi Germany found themselves in the dock.
There is a certain similarity with Nuremberg in some sense because Nuremberg was the only tribunal that addressed crimes against peace, as they were called then. This is the crime of aggression that the Tribunal for Aggression will address.
Hitler was already dead by then, but during the trial he was identified as the chief ideologue and responsible for the crimes of the Nazi regime.
The list was compiled in such a way that it included those who were accessible to Themis. Practically, except for one person who was tried in absentia, essentially, because at that time they thought that he was hiding, although in fact he had already died.
The first charges against Slobodan Milosevic were officially issued by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia while he was still in office. Milosevic became the first sitting head of state to be tried for war crimes. He faced 66 counts, including genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina, mass murders of men in Srebrenica, including elderly people and children, crimes against humanity, and violations of the laws and customs of war during conflicts in Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo.
I consider this tribunal false tribunal and indictments false indictments. It is illegal being not appointed by.
There's been no complaint made against us, ever, that we didn't hand Milosevic every material he was entitled to, or that we lied about the evidence, or that we misled with the evidence. We were also very careful, and this is something that it's quite hard for people who get too involved.
Although the dictator did not live to see the verdict, he was found dead in his cell. The trial of Milosevic became an important precedent in international law. It showed that even the highest-ranking officials can be punished. Russia's aggression against Ukraine was formally acknowledged by Putin himself, as it was preceded by his televised address. The full-scale invasion essentially unfolded online.
Gathering evidence for the office working on this in The Hague was very straightforward. The whole world witnessed this aggression, watching bombs fall on us, missiles fly, and fighter jets soar. Facts remain facts. Yet at the same time, Russia manages to lie, claiming Bucha was allegedly a staged event. The mass burial in Izum, also a staged event. That's why visits are important to us, as are the personal emotions of colleagues that genuinely influence decision-making, and of course, the world's support.
Statements regarding aggression were, one way or another, made publicly. Most of them. There are meeting protocols, statements in international organizations, bilateral meetings of Russian Federation representatives with their sometimes allies, sometimes just states, to whom they tried to convey their narrative about why the war became possible.
Ukraine is diligently working to ensure that Putin and his accomplices are held accountable through a special tribunal, specifically for the military aggression against an independent state. Additionally, the Russian dictator could be convicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the Russian army under the orders of its top leadership. These are cases for the International Criminal Court to consider.
On March 17, 2023, The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin and children's ombudsman Lyubova Belova for the illegal deportation of children from Ukraine's occupied territories to Russia. This is the first official accusation of a sitting president for a war crime and a gross violation of the Geneva Conventions and children's rights. Now, Putin can be arrested in any of the 123 countries recognizing the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction. Similar warrants have been issued for the arrest of former Russian Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov for strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, as well as against commanders of Russia's long-range aviation and Black Sea Fleet.
The International Criminal Court can hold any leader accountable, even those with personal or functional immunity. An example is the suspicion issued against Lyubova Belova and Putin, as well as other high-ranking Russian military officials. This shows that the ICC can overcome this immunity.
Shelling of residential buildings, the double-tap tactic to increase casualties at strike sites, torture, executions, sexual violence, civilian abductions, and the use of prohibited weapons, these are far from the complete list of what the Russian army at Putin's behest is doing in Ukraine.
War crimes, crimes against humanity, and potentially genocide. If there are proceedings for these crimes, they will, first of all, of course, be considered either by the International Criminal Court or including by national proceedings.
Currently, both Ukrainian and international human rights defenders are assisting investigations by collecting and systematizing evidence of crimes committed by the Russian army. Reports are sent to the UN, Council of Europe, OSCE, and EU. At least 8 lawsuits have been submitted to the ICC, describing mass murders in Bucha, illegal abductions, and torture of civilians.
The number of civilian casualties resulting from the aggression unleashed by the Kremlin regime, according to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, is approaching 13,000, including 682 children. Nearly 7 million Ukrainians have become refugees, scattered across the world. According to the President of Ukraine, as of early 2025, military losses exceed 46,000 people. Dozens of cities and villages have been wiped off the face of the earth. Dozens of settlements are occupied.
The process of investigating and convicting the crime of aggression must begin as soon as possible, simply because this aggression continues and has not been stopped. Another strong signal from the international community is needed to show that Putin and his regime are criminals. They are trying by all means to normalize themselves. They enter negotiations and, beyond ceasefire and peace establishment, impose numerous other conditions aimed at restoring their former status in the world. But I want to emphasize, no peace negotiations can halt the process of convicting criminals.
If no convictions are issued against the ideologues of Rashism and the full-scale war with Ukraine, the consequences for the world will be catastrophic.
We will then see that the rule of law has been entirely discarded into the dustbin of history, and we will only see the law of might, where large states can redraw the planet, reshape spheres of influence, and do whatever they please, including rewriting history, interpreting international law as they see fit, committing atrocities, and claiming the laurels of victors.
This is about both the past and the future. The failure to hold accountable in the past led to these new crimes we are experiencing now, and it will inevitably lead to their repetition. This concerns not only Ukraine and not only Putin. If this individual is not held accountable for the crime of aggression and all the war crimes and crimes against humanity that followed, it will set a precedent for other leaders who will feel impunity in their actions.
The Special Tribunal for Russia's aggression against Ukraine will happen. It will demonstrate that international law is not a fiction, but a real tool for achieving justice. The Russian military political elite led by Putin will bear full responsibility, criminal, legal, and historical, For the bloody war unleashed in Ukraine, the price of an aging dictator's whims and those who executed his orders has been the lives and fates of millions of innocent people. Ukraine and the world united around it will not let the Kremlin regime's crimes go unpunished. Olga Mihaluk, Special Report.